All right, thanks everybody for joining. We're going to be talking about web intake forms today. Again, this is your trainer, Scott Heist, and just by show of hands, you should have a little hand raising button there. Please let me know by raising your hand that you can see my computer screen. All right, thank you very much, and I'm judging by the fact that you raised your hand, you obviously can hear me, so that's good. And again, what we're going to be talking about on today's edition of Free Training Friday is we're going to be talking about web intake forms. Now, I'm going to be real honest with you. This is one of those topics that we could potentially talk about for an hour, hour and a half, but we're just going to be talking about the basics today. So this will be a good little lesson just to help get the wheels turning. And if you have any additional questions or need any help, you're always welcome to contact us at Professional Services or contact our training team, and we'll be able to give you more in-depth training. You'll also notice that I created a little web intake handout for you. So you should see that. It's a little PDF there. You should be able to download that. That's got some additional information regarding how you upload your finished intake form to your web server, and then also how you download the data that gets filled out by a potential client, how you download that into your AbacusLaw program. So make sure you download that little handout there so you have it for your reference. Now, you'll notice that you're muted. That's by design, so make sure you use the questions box there so that my colleague Kaylee can address questions here at the end. And we'll go ahead and get started. So intake forms, obviously, if you've used Abacus, you're familiar probably with intake forms. These intake forms here are basically designed, to grab data that we're using to create contacts, to create cases in our system. So a very popular intake form that I see firms utilize on their website is actually the contact form, because the contact form is kind of nice in that it's very basic, and what it's grabbing from the user is it's grabbing personal information, right? So if you have a website and you have a contact page on that website, or maybe you have a link on your website that says, contact us about your case, click here, right? Ideally, what you would want to have happen is when they click that little link, it takes them to a form where they can enter in their personal info, right? Like name, address, phone number, email address, all that good stuff. And then also a little note section where they can enter in some details about their case. My theory on web intake forms is to keep them relatively simple if they are going to be something that random website visitors are going to be accessing, because the more difficult, or I should say, the more detailed the web intake form is, the easier it is for potential clients to get confused when they're filling them in. So I would try and keep them relatively simple on your website. But the whole point of the game here with these web intake forms is to post this intake form on your site so that a client can actually be directed to it. They can fill in their personal information, contact info, and then a little description about their case. And then you will actually be notified to that, and you will be able to download that information into your Abacus program, okay, and actually create that person's name record, that person's note about their case, and then, it's just a matter of giving them a call and, talking about the case with them. So it saves you some typing time, it saves you some data entry time, and it's just overall just kind of a nice convenience for not only your employees, but also for the end, the potential client as well. So when we're talking about the intake form layout, it's going to be the same as what you see on your normal internal intake forms, okay? So it's going to look something similar to what you see on my screen here, okay? All we need to do is we have to tell Abacus that not only is this going to be an internal intake form, but it's also something that's going to go on our website. So here's how we do that. I'm going to close out of that intake form, and I'm going to go into my intake form manager, which is accessed by going to File, Setup, Intake Form Manager, down towards the bottom of the setup menu there. Now, in the intake form manager, you should see every single intake form that you have installed in your program. So you'll see ones that came with your program. You'll see your customized intake forms. You just want to find the intake form that you are looking to, put on your website. And what I recommend doing before you even configure it is highlight that intake form, click Edit, make sure that on the very first part, the very first tab of this intake form designer window, make sure that it is either set to web or both, okay? So it can't, if you have it set to data, internal data entry only, it's only going to be usable inside of AbacusLaw. So it needs to either be web only or both. Make sure you have one of those two selections created there, okay? Make sure you give it a good name, something that's identifiable, and then make sure that the records that are going to be on that intake form and the fields within those records, make sure that those are, something that is, pertinent to a web-based intake form. In other words, this dear field, while that makes sense to me internally when I'm creating a new contact, I know that I write in there, Dear Mr. Smith. A client may look at that on the website and not know what that field's for. So if this is going on the web page, might be a good idea to delete that field off there. So it's just fields, that people will really understand. Okay. But once you have that created, you can go ahead and click Next all the way through and select Finish. And that will take you out back to this little intake form manager window. Now, the next step is to configure this intake form to be compatible with your actual, web server, okay? So when I say web server, hopefully everybody is prepared for the fact that you will be uploading this to your website, okay? I'm assuming, everybody understands that. That's the purpose of a web form, okay? So you may have to invoke the knowledge of your IT guy or of, your internet service provider, or if you host your website on like a GoDaddy or an Amazon Web Services, give them a call, talk to the representative there and say, hey, I have my business website through GoDaddy and I need to put up this web server contact form. Can you help me do it? 99% of the time they're going to say, absolutely, let's walk through it, okay? But what you're going to do here, okay, before you even get to that step, you're going to highlight that form, you're going to click Configure, and this is where you have to put in some very specific information, which is why I said you'll probably need your IT person for this. First things first, you have to enter in your web server URL. So what's a URL for those who don't know? That is www.abacusnext.com. Okay, that's your web address. http://abacusnext.com. That's a URL. Okay, so that's the first thing that has to go in. Next, you have to put in mail server information, okay, particularly email information. Now, there is a caveat to this, okay? Now, the way this works, just so you have an idea behind the scenes, when a person fills in the information on the website, that information is gathered and it is sent to an email program, okay? That email program holds that data and that data is then downloaded into Abacus. So that means that you actually need to have an email account set up with whoever is hosting your website, okay, which is pretty common, okay, that's a pretty common thing. Usually if you have your website hosted on GoDaddy or Amazon Web Services, one of the things that comes with it is a business, email account. However, my rule of thumb with this is do not use your personal email account for this particular field, okay, for any of these fields. Have your service provider create a dedicated email address specifically for receiving that contact information off your website. Okay, you can call it whatever you want. contact@johnnyslawfirm.com. Okay, you can call it whatever you want, but I highly recommend creating a separate email account specifically for gathering, that information from your web intake forms. So you're going to want to make sure that your service provider, whoever handles your website, puts in the URL to your mail server. Here, again, that's the address to your mail server. And then make sure you are putting in the username and the password to that dedicated email account that you've set up, to handle this process. Okay. So once you have all of that filled out, you can click done. And now that is, going to be in play for that contact form. That's great. Now the system knows exactly what to use when it needs to download that data. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be typing anything in here because I don't have an actual web server to use, but I think you get the idea. Okay. So once you click done, that'll be saved. Now I'm going to cancel out of this. Okay. That takes us back to our intake form manager. The next step, once we have, the proper credentials in place, for our configuration, is we actually need to right-click on our form, and we need to create web page. This is a very easy process, okay? For those of you who are not website, design savvy, HTML code is what is primarily used when you are developing a web page. That's the most prominent type of code. So what this option does for you is it takes that intake form and it creates a little HTML file based off of the layout of your intake form, the fields, all that good stuff, okay? Now, when I click this, it's going to pull this up here because it's telling me that my web server's URL hasn't been defined or something along those lines. But for you, it will automatically take you into a window like this where you can give the file a name, okay, like new contact form. Notice I have one here, new case web form. .htm, okay, same concept. We want to give our file, our website a name, okay, and we want to save that. Now, this is the file that you will be giving and you will be uploading to your website. Whether you want to have that as a link on your website to get to, or if you actually want to paste that form into, a physical page on your website, much like a contact form, okay, it's up to you how you want to do that. So if you're the one that's designed your web page for your firm, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you hired somebody to do that, maybe it's a good idea to maybe talk to them about this on how to get this page uploaded. Or again, we are more than happy to take some time to show you how to do it as well. But this is the key. You have to create that little HTML or HTML file because that's essentially your template that's going to get uploaded to your web server. Now, once you have that template in place in your website, it's just a matter of directing people to that website and having them fill in and submit the form, just like you would on a contact form, right? Here's the Abacus webpage, okay? See how we have our contact form here? And then at the end, we click submit, same concept, okay? Same concept. And when they click submit, because you have configured that web intake form, the information that they put in those fields is going to get emailed to, that email address that you set up, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I need everybody to make sure that you are downloading the little handout that we had attached because that has additional information as far as, uploading your web intake forms to your server. Okay, and then also downloading and importing the web intake data when it gets sent to you from that, from that contact page. And that's actually quite easy. If you go under Matters Web Intake Forms, there is an option right there, download and import web data. So when you get that email to your little email server that says, hey, new contact information submitted to your website, all you would have to do is just click download and import data, and that's going to import all of that data into your Abacus intake form for you, and all you have to click is create records and close. So it saves you typing. So we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. Kaylee, I will turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thanks so much for the handout and the explanation of the web intake forms, Scott. So everyone, please submit your questions. The first one comes from Ben. Are there any concerns with using WordPress?
I would say off the top of my head, there probably are not concerns with using WordPress. WordPress is good, but I mean, when it's all said and done, it really translates to HTML code, or HTML or CSS, JavaScript. I mean, it still uses a lot of that stuff on the back end. So I don't see any potential issues. Again, if you run into some sort of issue, I'm sure that it's something we could figure out. So let us know, and we can take a look.
Feel free to type in your questions, everybody.
And while you're thinking of those, I just want you to keep in mind, most websites out there, most law firm websites out there have a contact sheet on their page, right? So you're already kind of doing, what we're talking about. We're just almost adding another level to it just to make your intake process more efficient, okay? We're basically wanting to kind of transform that contact form so that it can automatically be downloaded into Abacus for you. So it's taking it one step further to make your life a little bit easier.
Terry wants to know, is there another session for internal forms?
Yeah, so all internal forms, really any form at all, can be found underneath the intake button right there. So if you need to just fill in an intake form, you can just choose it, and you can start typing everything into these fields automatically. Okay, so if you need to get into the intake form manager to see what forms are internal only, what forms are web only, or what are both, then you want to go to File, Setup, Intake Form Manager, and then just by clicking on one of these forms and selecting Edit, you can see, like for instance, this one is configured for both. So I could put this one on my website, or I could do this one internal.
Terry replies, it's presently a Word file, and how do I make it resemble my Word intake form? It might be a customer form.
So it sounds like you probably, okay, so I think what you're saying is you have a Word document that you utilize when you're taking on a new case, just to type in client and case info. So what the first thing I would do is I would create a new intake form, okay, by going into my intake form manager again, okay, and selecting add from scratch, okay, and what I would do is I would model my intake form off of that Word document that you have, and then, it's basically going to be like adding fields for a client name, client address, case name, assigned attorney, things like that. So you want to create the intake form first based off of that Word doc. Then once you have the intake form created, then you can configure it to work on your website. So if you want some further training on just intake forms in general, but not specifically web intake forms, let us know. We do all kinds of training on, just regular old intake forms.
Yes, we did do one recently, so we can send you the link to the recording and the blog post that goes over intake forms in AbacusLaw. So we'd love to entertain any other questions that you all might have.
And for those who have not opened that little handout, while we're thinking of additional questions, I'll just pull it up for you real quick. It should look similar to this here. Notice the first section has to do with uploading your intake forms to your web server. So these are the steps here that you're really going to want to either follow yourself, or if you have someone that maintains your website, you're going to want to give these to that person because this is basically step-by-step directions how to upload it. And then here are some, the second part here is how to download and import the data that you receive from potential clients and download that into your Abacus program so that it, creates the data for you, the records for you.
I think your presentation was so thorough that there's just not that many questions, Scott.
Well, what can I say? I try.
So feel free to submit any proposals for topics topics that you want to see us cover, especially next month in November. And join us every Friday for these free training Fridays from 12 p.m. On the Pacific Coast to 12:30. We have a question. I am not finding the download. Could you tell me where to find it? Stacy, the download is in you should have a GoToWebinar control pane that you see on your screen, and it says handouts, and there's a little triangle that's facing right. If you click on that triangle, you'll see a handout name. It's a link in blue, and you click on it, and it will open up the PDF for you.
And if anybody has any issues downloading that, I know that sometimes people's security settings on their computers can sometimes prohibit, downloading foreign files. Let us know. Shoot us an email, webinars@abacusnext.com, and we can email you a copy of that document as well.
Yes, I will make note to add this document in the follow-up email that you all will receive in just a couple hours with the recording of this webinar, and with the handout, it should make it a pretty good recap. Alrighty, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Scott, for yet another wonderful Free Training Friday.
Not a problem.
The recap will be in your email for all of those of you who are asking. We will email you the handout, the recording of the webinar, to the same email that you used to sign up for this webinar. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend, and bye-bye.